Hi, my name is Mark Hinson. I'm with the Democrats, and I write Limelight. And if you picked up today's newspaper, on the front page was a man that looks very similar to this one right here, Carlisle Floyd, who I've had the pleasure of knowing for the past 15 years. And when he and I usually get together, we start talking, and no one can tell us to be quiet. So we'll try to recreate one of those conversations here and draw you in on some of his very illustrious career. Carlisle is, he really is the father of American opera. That's just not hyperbole. That's just a fact. So I'm going to start with this, if I can lift this book. This is the new book, the biography on Carlisle Floyd. It's called Falling Up, The Days and Nights of Carlisle Floyd. It was written by Thomas Holliday, and I had the chance to read it over the weekend, to read as much as I could. It is a huge book. It's very heavy. But the subject matter is wonderful, and I was wondering, it was exhaustively researched, so I was wondering how you feel now that you've had your life put under a microscope. How do you feel about Falling Up? And tell us a little bit about the title, too, please.
Well, it's a unique feeling, and I don't think I could possibly explain it to anyone, because you feel like somebody has been prying in your entire life. But it also it's a real impetus for memories, and also you're constantly checking the facts against what you remember. So I've read it all, and I can say that for the most part it's extremely accurate, and what is not accurate is just very, very small potatoes, so to speak. And so I'm very happy and relieved, I should say, the way it turned out. Because this man and I spent many sessions together over a period of 6 years, face-to-face in interviews, and then phone interviews, which went on at least an hour each time. And he was absolutely relentless in pursuing facts, as Mark has said, and he's an incredible researcher. And I ended up our association feeling like if there was anything I wanted to know, I would go to Tom Holliday. He would find a way to find out. So it was overall a very extraordinary experience, and one I don't intend to repeat. And I would get occasionally exasperated because it seemed awfully picky to me, and he was a real detail hunter, always the smallest items, which I would think, what does this have to do with a biography about me? But I find them in here, excuse me, and they served to make the story much more vivid and real and immediate, I think. And I have to say that although I never read it until shortly after it was issued, I was very, very, as I said, relieved and also pleased with the results, because he did something with the material he had collected that I didn't think was really possible. But then I've never written a biography.
When Carlisle and I sat down last Monday to interview for the story that I wrote in today's paper, and he said he was worried that it was going to be as boring as a government report, which it is not. I can verify that now that I've read it. And were you just joking? He said he wanted to write another one.
What is that?
Was he joking when he said he wanted to write another one?
No, he said to me he would like to write a revised edition if I keep on writing operas myself. So that there's a caveat in there. I have to participate.
Okay, I understand. I know you're writing another opera now, but that's kind of under wraps because it'll be produced in 2016. But he needs to finish it first, right?
I certainly do, yes.
Okay, so we won't write about what's in process. We'll write about another some of your operas you've already done. So.
Very good. That's much more comfortable.
Okay, yeah. Very good. Well, I'm interested in. I know you grew up in a small town in South Carolina, and the son of a Methodist minister, and your mother played piano, but it was not an opera family. So how did a boy from a small southern town get interested in opera? And I read in the book that Carmen, Bizet's Carmen, was your first true opera that you saw. But you didn't really want to become a writer of opera. You were more interested in writing in general and art. Is that true? So how did you enter the opera world?
Well, as a child, I drew. That was the first art that I went into. And then I wanted to play the piano because my mother played it, and I liked what she did. And so I prevailed upon her to teach me, and all went well until the instruction books came, and so I had my first lessons and realized there was work involved in becoming a pianist. And so at 3, I began piano and stopped piano, both. And as they say, I think quite wisely, a parent is not the best teacher to begin with. So I resumed studying piano when I was 10, and then after that it was a steady march towards a musical career. But I think to directly answer the question you posed, Mark, I've been asked this question perhaps as much as any. How did somebody growing up in a small town in South Carolina with no real acquaintance with opera end up writing operas? And I can only say, looking back on it, because I've had to peruse this myself and try to come to some sort of satisfactory answer. And the point is that I had interest in several arts. I was interested, first of all, in painting, as I said, in writing, as Mark has already said, and I was also interested in the theater. I love movies, and of course, I loved music. And so you put them all together, and basically what you come up with is that this art form which combines all these arts. And so I think it was a way of having my cake and eating it too, frankly, so that I didn't have to declare that I would, although until I was 30, I did nothing but pursue a career as a solo pianist. But after that, and after the success of my opera Susanna, and I received a commission very shortly after that, I never got back to the piano in the same way, fortunately.
Well, Carlisle's probably being modest. He's also an incredible pianist, and his piano sonata is one of the most incredibly, I'll say, difficult pieces ever written. And he was recently the subject of a documentary about his piano sonata, which you were writing about the same time as Susanna. Is that right?
Yeah, it came shortly after Susanna.
Right, and so he is an incredible composer for the piano as well as operas. So don't sell yourself short on the piano there.
I won't, except that I sat down and thought, well, I'll learn this. And after 3 days of practicing, and I wasn't really getting anywhere, I thought, this is difficult. And I thought I would learn it because I had written it, it would come easy. But when I was confronted with the fact that I had to learn it like any other difficult piece, I thought, no, thank you. I'll let other people do this. So that's the way it's worked out.
Yes. I recommend the documentary too. It's quite well done. Well, we're going to talk about the lady in your life, Susanna. Now we'll address this. This is your first opera, of course. But first, I'd like to start and tell me about what it was like when you first came to Tallahassee at the end of the 40s, the early 50s. You lived in a little green cottage. Is that when you moved into the green cottage on the corner of Macomb and Call Street?
No, I didn't move into that until the mid-50s.
Oh, okay.
Around the 53.
There used to be the green cottage. It still exists. It's at Millstone Plantation now. It's being preserved. But it used to be the little green cottage right on Macomb and Call, right by the Florida State Art Gallery. And that's where Carlisle wrote Susanna. And one of his friends, Yvonne Streetman, called it Snob Hill. A joke for Nob Hill. So you tell me about how Susanna came into being. And I'll just kind of start you off where'd you get the idea from the Apocrypha of Susanna and the Elders, which is what
Yes.
it's based on? And how did that become subject matter, and what happened after that?
Well, it was suggested to me by a very good friend of mine who was getting his master's here in English. And he was a would-be writer, and he asked me, had I ever thought of making an opera of the apocryphal book of Susanna and updating it to the present. And it immediately struck me as a very good idea. Mm-hmm. And so I had asked him, what is the actual book of Susanna about? Because I had never read it. And he told me very briefly what it was about, and as I said, this struck fire. And I thought this would not be difficult, I don't think, to adapt into a contemporary community, which is what I set out to do. And fortunately, this friend had a kind of writer's block. And I had always wanted to do my own librettos because I had done them with 2 one-act operas previously. And so when he wasn't forthcoming with a libretto, after several weeks, and I was very anxious to get going on this, I just simply took it over myself and have to give him credit for the original idea, which I'm happy to do, because I was able to convert it then into a libretto and music for an opera. But it had been an honorable mention in a competition for new operas. I had submitted it to New York, to Mannes School of Music there, who was having this competition. And they said that when I got the information back, they said it was one of 3 that they had selected for honorable mention. As it turns out, but there was no prize. The prize was for $1,000, as was published. And I found out 2 years later that actually Susanna had won the award, but when the time came to award the prize, there was no money. And this was told to me by a faculty member of the school, and who was on the judging committee. So I think it's pretty reliable. So I felt very heartened by that, even though by that time Susanna had had its New York premiere. But I went to then Dean Kirsteiner after it had received honorable mention, and I said, I've written a new opera, and I'd like to have it done at Florida State. But I was a very overconfident and cocky 28-year-old, and I said, now if it can't be done here, I'll shop it elsewhere, you know. And he was very understanding right from the beginning, and I said, I would like to have it done, but only if the 2 leads are professionals. And there's nothing like the confidence of being 28, but he agreed to it immediately. Yeah. He agreed to it, doing it here, and then wanting to do it with importing the 2 leads, and sent me out to the Aspen Institute to talk to the leading lady who actually came and did it, Phyllis Curtin. Right. So it was his remarkable kind of foresight, because at that point, I had been in Tallahassee for about 7 or 8 years. As I said, I was still a kid, and there was no operatic activity really in the School of Music when I came at all. Mm-hmm. And there was not an opera program. It's hard to believe given the marvelous program that exists now. Right. But nevertheless, we cobbled together the opera, and it had its world premiere here in 1955 with Phyllis Curtin from the New York City Opera and Mac Harrell, who was one of the finest baritones of his generation, who was at the Metropolitan Opera. Mm-hmm. And Phyllis had recommended the role to him immediately. Mm-hmm. So they were both brought in and spent 10 days rehearsing with the cast, which was drawn from the faculty at FSU, plus students. And so we had the premiere of Susanna here. And it was quite successful. In spite of the fact that many people thought it might be a little too extreme for Tallahassee at that time.
Well, let's talk about that for a while, because it was smack dab in the middle of the McCarthy era, but you told me one time that you were more or less inspired by the snake handlers in West Virginia, who had been...
Well, when I chose a place for Susanna to be set,
right.
I wanted some place recessed and that was really not in touch with outside communities, mm-hmm. and was its own world and set its own moral values.
Right. But it deals with moral hypocrisy. So
yes, it deals with that entirely.
Did you consciously do that, or you think the times reflected that? Which came first?
I think I had been through, everybody who lived in Tallahassee at that time, and especially at the university and at the Capitol, had been through a very difficult time, because we had our own version of the McCarthy committee here, because we had the Johns Committee, mm-hmm.
Which was, he was subsequently governor. I don't know what he was then. I think president of the Senate here.
I think you're right, yes.
But they had instigated a very rigorous searching out communists, so-called, and homosexuals in the state universities. And
it was a very, very black time in which people were looking over their shoulders and wondering if they were going to be fingered, you know, or what. Even if you knew yourself that you were not involved.
Right.
Nevertheless, the whole concept which I use in Susanna of being found guilty without accusation.
Right.
I mean, just through accusation and no evidence, which of course is the bed seed for fascism. Mm-hmm. And we had a good bit of that for several years in Tallahassee as a result of the Johns Committee, and we all felt it at the university because we were all naive kids. I mean, on the faculty, not all, but people my age, and we were required to sign a statement saying that we had never belonged to the Communist Party. Most of us had no idea what it would even be to belong to the
Exactly.
Communist Party, or how you went about it.
I don't look good in red. That's right.
No. But nevertheless, it was a very difficult time to live through, and I saw students of mine very affected by it, and it was not happy. Mm-hmm. So that was in the background of Susanna. I was not writing a sermon.
Right.
But if it could deal with something that was a strong moral issue, I was happy to do it.
Mm-hmm. Did you get any backlash in the local community?
None at all.
None at all. Wow.
Many were predicting that it would.
Right.
Because Dr. Campbell, who was the president at the time, was very concerned about the libretto. Mm-hmm. He thought it was very immoral, very racy, and I had to. The only reason it got done was the fact that he had accused me of something that was not in the libretto, and I went over and saw him, and we had a very vigorous conference in his office because I was willing to what he had to say until he was very slanderous in a way by saying that I had injected sex into the story just for titillation.
Oh, okay.
And I said, you do understand that the whole story turns on this.
Yeah.
Well, no, he hadn't understood this.
Yeah.
And eventually he simply said, I'll take it back to my wife and we'll read it again. True. And subsequently he came, about 10 days later, he told Dean Kirsteiner that he would release students' funds for its premiere, which he had previously canceled. Uh-huh. The student body had elected to have funds go towards it. But he had vetoed that, but now he took his veto away, but said at the same time that he and his wife would be out of town and would not be able to attend.
Convenient.
Yeah. I don't mean to defame him in any way, but this was a very difficult thing to happen. As it turned out, he was able to come to the premiere and did, because I had two very good friends, Leroy and Mary Cole Collins here, and they gave the opening night party, and they were governor and first lady at the time. And so the Campbells found it possible.
Suddenly they wanted to
attend.
come see the bathing scene.
But so all ended well.
Oh, good, good. Is it true that the budget for Susanna was $1,500?
Oh, I don't think it was any more than that.
Oh, okay.
No.
I'm inflating it, huh?
Yeah, because I know the costume budget was $50 at the time.
Wow.
And was really made by one member of the cast. Made all the women's costumes.
Wow, wow.
And we got the fabric and everything for one of the dime stores downtown, which no longer exists. So it was done on the cheap, to say the least.
Yes, okay. Well, you got your opera, and Doak Campbell got his football stadium, so everything worked out. So, well, good. I'm going to talk a little bit about, I'm jumping ahead from the 50s to 2000 to Cold Sassy Tree, since it's being performed for the first time at Florida State this weekend. So I was reading in the very heavy book here last night about what you went through to put together Cold Sassy Tree, and the first thing I'd like to talk about is how you found the book, and I think people are very interested in how you find the material you like to write about, since you are the librettist and the composer, which is very rare in the opera world to have the same person in two people. It's usually a two-person operation. And so I wanted to find out how you got Cold Sassy Tree, which is another Southern story, and then I'd like to talk about the Faye Dunaway after that. so let's start with the how you How you pick material? How does material find you, or you find material as a librettist or a composer first?
It's a kind of instinctive response you have. I won't say it's a bell going off, but you say, this may have possibilities. And I read Cold Sassy Tree. My sister had given it to me to read because she thought it was such an accurate depiction of the South at that time. Although neither of us were born then, but we were not very far removed from it. And we thought it was unusually accurate and sympathetic and colorful. And I read it and enjoyed it thoroughly, and then gave it to a friend of mine who was my colleague and dear friend, who was head of the Houston Grand Opera. And he was just strictly a mainliner Philadelphian. So I gave him this book to read and just to see how he would respond to it. In other words, how somebody out of the South would react to it. Well, he loved it. It became his bedside reading. And then he immediately started saying, why don't you make an opera out of it? And I said, wait a minute, I didn't say I could do that before. So literally it was about 18 months before I could find a way to handle the book. The book is very episodic and very colorful, but there's no what we call in dramatic writing through line. It's a series of vignettes, one after the other, that don't necessarily one does not necessarily fall after the other logically. And this was giving me a great deal of trouble until finally I realized that the heart of the story, as I saw it, was really the love story between the woman and the older man who married her just shortly after his wife died and upset the entire community, which is the underlying story that, or action that pervades the entire opera. And so after about 18 months, I finally told my friend David Gockley that we could go ahead with the commission. And then he got 4 other companies to come in with him. San Diego, I think Seattle, Miami.
Charlotte?
Charlotte was one, yeah. And so it was launched in 2000,
right.
the opera.
Well, I was fascinated to learn because Faye Dunaway, who is from Jackson County, which is where I'm from, she had bought the rights to it and had done a made-for-TV movie about it.
Yeah.
And so there was a lot of worry that Faye Dunaway and Ted Turner wouldn't give you the right to produce an opera since they owned it. So I was kind of fascinated to learn that. But so you started writing it even though that
Well, the
hadn't been
point is
clear?
that they had film rights,
They had film rights. Okay.
but
so,
not stage rights.
Okay. So if you filmed if you filmed your opera,
Then that would
Right.
require permission from them.
I see.
But we never got to that point.
Okay.
And it never became an insuperable obstacle, thank goodness, because it could have become one.
right.
I have done books, for instance, All the King's Men, Robert Penn Warren,
Right.
and they held us up on film rights a long time.
Really?
Because my publishers wanted the film rights as well as the stage rights.
Right.
And so the television version of my opera, which was called Willie Stark, it was done on a national hookup, and they said you cannot use Robert Penn Warren's name.
Wow.
So I didn't like this at all, but there was nothing I could do.
Right.
And I hoped, as I think was accurate, that most people knew All the King's Men.
Yes.
And knew who the author was, because it was such a popular book and such a well-regarded book. But it can become a problem. But Faye Dunaway did her version, which was a TV
A made-for-TV
version,
yeah,
which
right.
was not very successful, as I remember.
It was.
But at least it didn't provide any kind of obstacle for my doing an opera out of it.
Did the Steinbeck estate, he did of Mice and Men, which I think is maybe his greatest opera, by the way. That's my personal opinion. But it's just a brilliant adaptation of Steinbeck's of Mice and Men. Did you get the blessing from Steinbeck's?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And eventually we got film rights from them,
Great.
from the widow of Steinbeck.
One of my favorite quotes you gave me last week, which I didn't get to work into my story, is Hal Prince directed of Mice and Men. Is that right? No, Hal Prince said of Mice and Men, he said, it's director proof.
That's right. Yes.
Which is a grand comment that means somebody can't come in and louse it up. Well, Cold Sassy Tree, you have been going to the rehearsals for Cold Sassy Tree this week, and you've been talking to some of the singers. Are they intimidated when you come to the set, or are they glad to see you? And I leave that to your interpretation.
Well, let me just say that a student of mine, and he's my only student, said at lunch today, my niece Jane and I we were having lunch together, and he says, "Oh, they all know when you're there." So that's the way he put it. I said, "I don't think it makes any difference, when I've only been to 2 rehearsals so far." But he says, "You were not backstage." He says, "Word gets around very quickly if you're in the audience." So yes, they know.
They know.
But I've made, I hope, friends with some of them, and I've talked to the leads many times and made suggestions, and the stage director and the conductor have been very generous in asking for my opinion or asking for any kind of suggestions. So it's been a very amicable relationship so far, and I saw it last night, and it's in very good shape.
Oh, good.
And it's going to be quite a colorful production.
Fantastic, fantastic. This is a very, I hope this isn't too vague, but when do you run into people who say, "Oh, you write opera"? I don't like opera. They almost automatically, they I don't know, they have some kind of view of it as being this 10-hour Wagnerian endurance test, which your operas are not 10-hour endurance tests. They're quite enjoyable and melodic and beautiful. So what do you say to somebody that is that much of a operaphobe, I guess you would call them? So, or do you waste your time?
Well, no, I think it's. I think Americans have been brought up to think that if you have opera, it has to be in Italian. That's the first thing. Okay. You're not really getting the genuine article unless it's in a foreign language.
That's true.
Preferably Italian. If you have to have it, then German. And French comes next. And then English is way down the line.
Right.
So it's been a very rewarding experience for me during my career in Europe to see the opera done in English with German surtitles. And also with French surtitles.
Oh, that's fantastic.
I feel like turnabout's fair play. We've been doing that for years here.
Yes.
In reverse. So I think the best way to disabuse anybody who has that view of opera, that it's something stilted, it's something remote, it's something beyond the expression and enjoyment of just the average person, just has to go to an opera with surtitles. And see, and they say, "Oh yeah, so that's what's going on, or that's what it's all about." And I think this is the accurate time for me to say to you, we will have surtitles. I saw them last night, so they're there. So you can't miss a word unless you are somehow unable to read. But they're there and very easy to read. Okay. And I think it's been a huge boon to opera to have surtitles.
Absolutely.
Because we in this country would never think of going to foreign movies without super titles.
Right.
And that brings it all down into a very easy comprehension for people. So we will have surtitles with the production here.
Well, while we're kind of talking in broad terms, how has the opera scene in America changed since you were a 21-year-old piano player on Call Street writing Susanna, and today's climate in American opera?
Well, it's just an incredible burgeoning of interest in opera and interest in opera companies. When I began my career, there were 3 major companies in the country. Wow. The Metropolitan, San Francisco, and the New York City Opera. That was it. Wow. Those were the only 3 companies that could have launched my career as a composer, and fortunately the New York City Opera did with their production of Susanna. But it was still considered then very much European. It was a European art form. It was not really for Americans, and it was not enjoyable by Americans. And then with the advent of surtitles in the 1970s and 80s, the audiences just went just double and triple who came to operas, because of course they were in on it by that time. They didn't have to guess what was happening on the stage. They knew.
So I think the advent of super titles, plus the fact that there was a very big movement on the part of American singers after World War II to completely attend to the neglect that had been given the dramatic side of opera, so that they very much prided themselves on becoming convincing stage actors as well as singers. And that has completely revolutionized opera. Because in the old days, the producers were not particularly concerned with the appearance of the performer. Did the performer look like the character? It was not a concern. Now it is. So the old days, when we talked about 250-pound sopranos who were dying of consumption and being asked to believe that they no longer exist. So you'll see very performers who are really chosen for their roles by appearance and by acting ability as well as voice. And it's made a huge difference. And the Europeans are behind us on this now. But it's been part of the enormous burgeoning of interest in opera that we have this, and also the fact that they very much pride themselves on being actors as well as singers.
Yes. The acting has improved in opera.
Oh.
Even in my lifetime. It's
Yes.
a lot better than just hit your mark and,
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
I joked right before we came out that Carlisle and I should sing, and he said, "Oh God, no." So, so I have one last question. I'm just curious. This is kind of I'm throwing this one out there, and then we'll ask if you have a question to ask Carlisle. We'll invite, we have a few more minutes. When you went to pick up your award at the White House, what was the experience? If you saw today's picture, today's paper, you saw a picture of Carlisle with George W. Bush and the First Lady standing there. So how was? And you look very. I don't know whether it looks like you're going in front of a firing squad, or you look or you have very good posture. I don't know which. So what was
I
that?
prefer to think I had good posture. You know,
What was that?
well, it was a very cordial affair, and we were ushered into the Oval Office, and I think there were 8 of us.
Right, Leontine Price and.
No, that was
that's not right. Sorry,
yeah,
sorry.
that was another.
Sorry.
And we were introduced to the president, and we sat around, and then we had our photographs taken with the president, and then we went out into. And I have no idea where we were by that time, but anyway, then the First Lady spoke very charitably, welcomed everybody who had come to congratulate us. And that was about it. But it was certainly a very memorable time for me, or anybody who's been through the same experience.
It seems like a surreal experience. It seems
Yeah,
kind of out-of-body experience.
This is a place that you never expected to enter. You
Right.
know. You've seen pictures of it, but you never had done more than that.
Exactly, exactly. Well, Carlisle and Thomas Holliday, who wrote this incredible book, are going to be signing copies of it on Thursday at Lemoyne. And when I picked it up, it has a foreword written by Placido Domingo, the famous opera singer. And when I read that, I said, "You really are Carlisle Floyd." So if anyone would like to ask Carlisle a question, we can take one right here. Oh, it's called Falling Up. Falling Up, what's Falling Up mean?
Falling Up is a stage term in which the actor may be feeling down or whatever, but once he gets on the stage, there's a big spurt of adrenaline, and he's able to perform. I had never heard the term either, but the author knew the term. And then I've talked to stage friends of mine. They say, "Oh yeah, that's something we are very acquainted with."
So that little extra kick of adrenaline.
Yes, that gets you into the performing arena and
Yes.
gets your performing juices going.
Right, right. Is there another question? Oh, here's one right here, and then we'll get to you in the back.
Yes,
Hey, Mimi.
I wonder if Mr. Floyd would care to comment on his opinion of what the live Metropolitan Opera transmissions, how they might impact opera attendance generally, especially at the Met.
the live broadcast of the movies at Governor Square. They do the live broadcast from the Met on Saturday afternoons
yes,
mainly,
yeah.
on Wednesday afternoons. How do you think that's going to build the opera audience?
Well, they're transmitted all over the world.
Right, right.
I think it's been a huge success. And it's not only at the Met, San Francisco does it on the West Coast, and now it also is beamed to Europe. And it's just been an enormous success, and to be able to go to a Met performance as it is happening and to pay $20 instead of $250, I mean,
Yes.
that's a bargain in itself. It's unparalleled.
Yes.
So I think it's going to continue to broaden the audience for opera, especially when they're done that well.
And we had a question in the back. Yes, ma'am.
Yes, I'm from a small town in South Carolina, and I went to Converse too. So I'm from Greenville. I went to Converse in the 50s. When were you there, and what town are you from?
She went to Converse as well. She wants to know.
Speak into it.
Well, I was there in the 40s, not the 50s, but I was from. Well, my father was a Methodist minister, so we lived in about 5 different places before I went to college, even.
Where were you born then?
Where were you
But I graduated from North High School, if you know where that is. It's south of Columbia. It's a small town.
There's a town in South Carolina named North.
North.
North South Carolina. That's
That's right.
I didn't think the North was very popular in South Carolina.
Also, there's one called Due West.
Due West.
So
There you go. Yeah. All right. I've been down south, you know. So. Another question for Carlisle? Oh yeah, we got one back here. Okay.
There was an enormous void when you left Florida State to go to Houston, and I never was quite sure whether you took Madam Nicolaides or she took you. What was the story there?
I would have to say that I took her. We were beginning the Houston Opera Studio, which was a training program for young singers between their collegiate and professional careers, which has been enormously successful. But of course, when we began it, we didn't know that. But we needed a voice teacher who had had a very distinguished career, his or herself, we felt, in order to train singers at this level. And so I suggested Nicolaides and David Gockley, who was my co-founder, or I was co-founder with him, of the Houston Opera Studio, met her and was delighted with her. And so she thought it would be something new for her at that period in her life, and also her teaching career, because she would have absolutely choice students, I mean, chosen from a nationwide search to work with. And that's exactly what happened. So that people like Denise Graves, for instance, now, she studied with Nicolaides in the opera studio. She's one of, and perhaps one of the most famous.
Absolutely.
But Nicolaides had wonderful students to work with until she resigned from there. She was quite elderly when she finally resigned. In her late 80s or early 90s. So she said when she died, she was sure that she would look up at God and say, I have a lesson to finish. And it almost came to that because she was 96 or 97 when she died.
Yeah, not long ago.
That's right, indefatigable.
That's wonderful. Another question for Carlisle? How do you, opera, I have one for you, and this is another general question. Opera, the stereotype is that divas, and there's a lot of big personalities in the opera world, particularly with the singers. Have you met a lot of difficult people, and what is the way to deal with a, quote, difficult personality? I know, and please keep the language clean.
I'll do my best. But it's actually, I can say it almost doesn't exist among American and English singers.
Really? Okay.
The point is that in a rehearsal room, regardless of who's doing the leading role or whatever, the point is that everybody is a singer who has a career. So I think that generally the American singer is very anxious to have his cohorts like him, as well as respect him. And I think any singer who would affect that, being superior to his colleagues, would be in for a very difficult time. One person, and they're only, I can only mention to you, and I won't mention them, 2 or 3 who are real divas. I mean, in the worst sense.
That was the sense I was asking it in.
One of them was let go from the Met
Yeah.
because of colleague problems and so forth.
Yes.
And when they announced that to the group of other singers, there was general applause. So I think knowing that can happen to you keeps you humble,
Yes.
at least towards your colleagues.
I see.
They simply don't put up with it. And English singers are the same way. You know, basically they say, get over yourself. You know, we're all professionals here. So it's, if it exists, and I suppose it does exist in Europe still, but far less than it ever did in the past. It just, again, the American and English singers have led their way in this. And it means I've never worked in anything, believe it or not, in my long career, but a happy atmosphere in the rehearsal room. It simply has never happened to me.
Well,
I can honestly say that. It's something that I look forward to going to rehearsals because the singers are all so collegial and they all love what they're doing and love doing it together.
right.
I don't mean to sound like Pollyanna here, but that's the way it is. And anything else, there's just not time for it. There's too much pressure. They have usually 3 weeks to prepare a production of a new work. And that means a great deal of hard rehearsal time. And you see, the thing about professionals that you have to tell young students, like we have at FSU now, we have wonderful talents, but they're graduate students. But to be told that if you're in a professional situation, you arrive at the first rehearsal with your part learned, ready to go. There's no training you once you're on the job.
Right.
So that puts everybody on his toes right from the very beginning. And also, I think, makes each other a respect for each other and their professionalism.
Well, I think that's what we were talking about the other day. The focus is on the work, not the
That's
not
right,
the personality.
yeah. That's right.
So, we have a question in the back.
Do you have any current contemporary opera composers that you're working with or that you would suggest we pay attention to?
In any of your contemporaries, current American composers that you like, that you would recommend, or somebody that you're keen about?
Yes, 2 young men, I should say younger, but they're very much younger than I am. One is Jake Heggie, and they'll be doing an opera of his at FSU in the summer. And also, whose most recent success was an adaptation of Moby Dick, if you can believe it. I'm still shaking my head in disbelief that had such a success. And then Mark Adamo is another one whose greatest success has been an adaptation of Little Women. And he's having a new work done in San Francisco this year. So the happy thing for me is to see young composers coming along and having the chance to have their operas done. Because these are young men in their 30s. And to have the opportunity to have first-class productions by major companies is extraordinary.
Absolutely.
And they're not the only ones. We have John Adams, of course, who has a regular, I would say, a ticket at the Metropolitan. Anything he does, he can be sure of that they'll do it at the Metropolitan.
And he's written a lot of great stuff too. So
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Nixon in China,
Yeah.
all that. Okay, we have one more.
You mentioned the Johns Committee. Could you also comment on any experiences you might have had or impact on your life growing up in the South during when the Jim Crow era was still in place and the changes in racial integration, and whether that had an impact on your work?
No, I don't think. I think racial integration is pretty complete in the opera world now. I can't think of any situation in which a person would be discriminated against because of skin color. I haven't encountered it. We have several African Americans in the cast for Tallahassee Tree, and in a situation which you probably wouldn't have found them in the time of the opera, but there they are, and they are easily accepted.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's been the norm pretty much all around.
Did you encounter much racism growing up in South Carolina in the Depression era or the World War II?
Oh, sure.
It was-
Yes,
yeah.
I mean you grew up with it.
Yeah.
Yes,
Right.
and you didn't question it for a long time.
Those days are gone.
Yes.
and good riddance.
Yeah, very good riddance.
Well, yes, question right here.
Does the music come first or the libretto?
Ah, that's a good question. Music come first or the libretto?
Oh, the libretto comes first. I don't do anything with the music until I have the story done.
Right.
I get that question all the time, however, so.
I asked Carlisle how his new opera was coming along, and he said, "Oh, I've got the libretto." Said, and I've got all the music for the first act, and said, "But not the second act." And I said, "Why is that?" And he said, "When I find out, I'll tell you." Says, "I have no idea." So, yeah. But we were talking backstage. We were talking about. I said, "There's nothing more pure than a deadline." So, yeah, if you think you have writer's block, just get a deadline. Anything else before we call it a day? Carla. Oh wait, one last one. Last one.
How long did it take you to write?
Which one? Oh, sorry. You got it?
I hate to tell you the difference. I mean, when I wrote Susanna, I did it all probably in a year's time. Now, you understand I was teaching all day at the same time,
And
and
you
I
were
worked
27.
at night and over the weekends. But now, when I put my name to a commission, it's for 3 years. And that's starting from the libretto to the music to the orchestration.
Well, it's a lot of work. So.
Yes.
Well, listen, thank you, Carlisle. It's always a pleasure to be here. Carlisle Floyd.